don't we get started? Good evening, everyone. It's good to see you all. And I know I was hearing folks had a hopefully somewhat of a quiet, calm December, and others hopefully got a chance to do something exciting. But more importantly, hopefully everyone just had a safe December in the way that y'all ever want, the way that works for y'all. And so, for today, we have a few items, and one item that we'll save towards the end, but I want y'all to be thinking about this as we have this conversation, is that we do eventually need to vote for a chair and a co-chair and so forth. And part of our last conversation, or one of our last meetings, was that we wanted to give the group some time to get to know each other, to then determine, okay, want to make a nomination, for X individual, and eventually get to that. And so, today's one of those opportunities to continue to get to know each other. And then as we work towards our next meeting, this February 2nd, I believe, we can then, work through nominations and the voting process. I just kind of wanted to put that out there, so I keep it on top of mind as we have our conversation today. And sorry, and I'm also reading the notes here. One of the homework assignments, speaking of December, we shared a handful of resources and links for some asynchronous learning during the month of December.
Kathy?
And wanted to create the space to see if there are any questions. Some wonderings, something that stood out in any of the materials, that we can have a conversation. But also, as a reminder, we do have our Google form to submit questions. So on our site, we do have the link. So as we have these conversations, right, we're kind of back. It's January, and we have these conversations. If there's a moment where maybe you didn't get a chance to ask a question, or you just need to kind of process the question some more, you can definitely leverage that Google form to submit questions. So with that in mind, just want to pause, create some space right now for folks to raise questions, share any thoughts on the materials.
There you go. Agenda there.
I'll pause there.
Sorry, could I quickly jump in before we go into questions? I put on the agenda, and I was told I have to make sure I say this tonight before we start. But per the law, we are not allowed to use the chat function for anything major, or really we're not supposed to use the chat function in any streamed public meetings, because the chat is not visible to in the stream. And so we have to pretend as though we're in a space where the public is in the space with us. And so if you do have questions, make sure you say them verbally. If you are having any trouble with your mic, feel free to use the chat to let me know, and we'll have to find another way for you to communicate. But just letting you all know, we're not supposed to use the chat function. So,
thank you, Jordan. That's important. Yeah, that's definitely.
I want to make sure I threw it out there before we started going into things.
Yeah, appreciate that.
I might point out, when the board has their meetings and they break out into small groups, the public gets cut out on those. So.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So I
guess I can start. I just want to hello everyone. My name is Karandra Cruz. In full transparency, I've been dealing with a lot, and I have not had a chance to be able to review any other materials or anything like that. So I'm just now, my daughter was just released from the hospital today. after weeks of dealing with a lot of different issues. But so I'm just now coming out of like foggy land of just a whirlwind of stuff that's been happening over since December going into the new year. So I think for me, I just want to, this is going to be a space for me just to listen and to learn and to kind of catch up on things. So I'm going to be pretty quiet. I might have my camera off. So I just wanted to let people know that.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you for sharing that, Karanja. And of course, the materials are there. And we're here. So we as we go through this process. Mariah, I see you have your hand up.
Hi, thanks so much. Mariah Dula here. I had a question. I was watching some of the local option levy committee kind of conversations and trying to understand kind of the bigger picture for why they're wanting to extend that levy. And there was discussion about whether they potentially take that to the legislature. I thought levies were basically a bond passed by the voters. So I was kind of curious for the context around that.
Yeah, that great question. So there's a distinction between the bond and the local option levy. They both function like with taxing property. So that's kind of like some of the commonality. So taxing a house, taxing a business, and they generate revenue. With the bond, it's restricted to capital type projects. So we think about construction, renovation, curriculum, technology, things that have a specific life to them. While the local option levy, similar to a bond, is voter approved. So the local option levy also goes to the voters, and then they approve that. The distinction with the local option levy is that that is used for it can be used for operational activities related to the classroom. So we use that, and that's the way it's written to that extent, and that funding is used to pay for teachers. It's capped. There's certain limits, and that funding source is funds close to 900 teachers. It's about $100 million, $105 million that gets taxed. Now, there are certain legislative caps that limit how much you can collect for a variety of different reasons. There's like 3 different caps. And so there's current conversations, which are exciting, and they're good conversations to explore. There's so much capacity that can be accessed to support the local option levy, but we can't fully access it because we're capped due to these legislative limits. So conversations are happening. Could we explore raising those limits? It's been done before. So inflation, enrollment changes. There's so many different dynamics that happen over the course of a decade of 5 years. And so the due diligence of the committee is to explore, should we, or how could we explore increasing those caps to allow for more funding to come to the district to support these functions, to continue paying for teachers. Does that help?
Yeah, it does. I guess I was just curious on the piece. I guess I didn't understand the cap piece to it. So if the legislature increased the cap, we would still need voter approval to extend a levy beyond
correct.
current.
Yep.
Current. Okay.
Yep. Correct. So getting the cap approved is one thing, but the voters still need to approve it so that it continues for the next cycle.
Can you tell me just really quickly, have we had a pretty strong history here in PPS of getting those local option levies and bonds approved?
We have. I don't have the percents. There was a point where I think it was in the 90s where it wasn't a good track record, but then eventually over the past, I'd say maybe 10 years, it's been a fairly good track record. Olympia.
Yeah, I was just wondering, is the local option levy on the May ballot the same as school board races, or is it back on so when is that?
It hasn't been determined yet. So that's part of the ongoing discussions to get the right timing. And there's a certain time frame that it needs to happen so that it then lines up with like the collection of taxes, so that it lines up before the current levy expires. So those are ongoing conversations.
Do you know when the current levy expires?
Yes, we do. It's a 5-year levy, and it doesn't expire until 2024. But we may have to go out early, so you don't have the prospect of having a local option levy feature on the ballot at the same time that we're going out for a capital bond, which builds our school. So we had a nasty experience in 2011 where we had both a levy and a bond measure. And the bond measure passed and the local option levy, the local option levy passed and the bond measure did not. And so the board tries to avoid those kinds of conflicts. That also dictates whether it's in May or in November and so on.
Yeah.
And what other jurisdictions are doing is also needed to be looked at, because if you have Multnomah County going out for something at the same time the school board is, that you might have a built-in conflict. So
Absolutely. Yep.
So I have a question also, a few questions. One, so when we look at that, that table that talks about graduation, it has graduation rate in it, but they're talking about the gaps, how much, what's the percentage that students need to improve to be at grade level. So we know that students, that African-American students, I'll just say Black students, have been the lowest or next to the lowest in most categories. And then when we look at these gaps, the percentage that they have to improve, we look at on that table, I think I forgot the page, just a minute. It's page 22. So, but then when we go to the graduation rate, it's a 2.4, which is pretty close to almost everybody to achieve the goals, right? And so, but my question is, do we know how many modified diplomas are being given out? Because I have a concern about that. I'm trying to figure out, how do we go through, and our students are near the bottom or next to the bottom, but when it comes to graduation, they're graduating. How are they graduating? I need to know how many modified diplomas have been given out the past few years. Because I do know that African-American students are getting more than their share than others, I should say. So that was one. And then the testing, when they talk about testing and they're looking at these scores, I'm trying to figure out, let me see which page. If you look at, well, I'll just look at the mathematics for 5th grade. So it says Native Americans and it has that little 2. Does that mean only 2 students took the test? What is that 2 for?
I do not, I'm having a hard time finding the document.
So the document is, what's the name of this? Proposed board goals.
Okay.
And so when they do the bars, I don't know what they talk about the test for the years 2016 through 2019. So they talk about where the students were by group, And then we get to projections for the 3rd grade and 5th grade and 8th grade. And I just want to know what the numbers are in those bars. So at the very beginning of the bar, it says Native American, 2 students. And they project that 14% of those students are going to meet grade level. And then
I see it now. Yeah.
okay, so
Yeah.
could you just make sure I'm reading this correctly?
I
Well,
would
actually,
need to
I'm asking
confirm.
the question. I want to know.
Yeah.
what
And we can
date
get back to for confirmation on that. I don't have the answer off the top of my head.
Okay. Yeah, I'd also like, well, never mind. I would like to know what those numbers are. How many people actually took the test? Because I've heard that a number of students were not taking the test, and how are we using that to predict? And when I attend the state meetings, one of the things they said is we haven't had good data for a couple of years. So anyway, I think that was, let me see. Oh, and I also had this question about, they're talking about some of the new programs they're going to do. And at Lincoln High School, they have something called education prep. I'd like to know what that is. The rest of them I knew, but education prep at Lincoln High School, what is that?
Yeah, we could certainly ask and get that.
Thank you.
Other questions, comments?
Who would you ask? Like, who's the source of that information?
So for the question regarding the reading and whatnot, I would speak to Dr. Adams, our Chief of Research, Assessment and Accountability. And then as far as the program at Lincoln, I would start with most likely Margaret Calvert as the regional soup for that area, just to see what insight she has. She oversees a set area up at high school, secondary, and get some information from her. Yeah.
Okay, I do have one more question.
Yeah.
So I read the superintendent's report, and it sounds wonderful. You know, we have all these goals. Some of them, many of them are the same that we had for this past year. And I would like to know how many, so they talk about hiring more social workers, doing more for paras, et cetera, et cetera. I would like to know where we are right now. They also discuss class size, making class sizes even smaller. But could we find out how many additional social workers do we actually have? How many, and what's the average class size, et cetera? So where are we today is what I'd like to know currently.
Yes, we can get that. We have a report that was shared with the board. I believe it was October. So we'll make sure on class sizes, and then I'll circle back regarding like the number of social workers in the district and that information.
Yeah. So for me to see what he's saying we're doing, well, where are we coming from?
Yeah.
And so anyway, in other words, do we meet the goals that we talked about last year? So when we did the budget review, and at the end we said, yes, we're not gonna fire anybody, we're gonna hire blah, blah, blah. And I just would like to know where we are.
And one of the aspects with class sizes is that this was, as we were getting into this year, so thinking about where we were last spring, working on the budget towards this year, there was this step down from class sizes. And I think it's important, like particularly when we think about CBRC, to distinguish between the staffing plan. So like the school side staffing plan has ratios. So the school side staffing plan says, for example, elementary will have 28 students to 1. like it's like the rules that establish number of students that come in will generate the number of teaching allocations. And over the pre-pandemic levels, our staffing ratios have been lowered. Now, the the pandemic occurred and enrollment started to decline. And we were hopeful enrollment would bounce back up. But the trend, that has not been the trend, but we've kept classrooms, the number of the classroom sizes as steady as possible, pretty much ignoring the ratios. So even though the ratio said 28-1, we were maybe closer to 26-1. And leading into this year, we started to right size because we're like, we can't keep padding and using not using actual enrollment. And as we came into this year, there were, if I recall correctly, 88 teaching allocation reductions that were made. They did not impact any teachers. No teachers were fired.
Oh, right. We went through that, right?
Yeah. So I kind of like bringing it back and from the perspective of really thinking about like the distinguishing factor between the class size ratios, the staffing plan, the school site staffing plan, that's maintaining that, but then also calibrating between what we thought enrollment was going to be, calibrating against where we thought enrollment was going to be to where it's actually trending now. And so we continue to see that trend line go down. So it's like, how do we continue to support the class sizes into next year? And the report that was shared with the board, it focuses on this year, and there's some really good data. So we'll make sure that it's shared on the link, and we can point to it as well or we'll share it with you, and then also make sure we share the link to where it sits on the board website. But it's really insightful information.
Thank you. I'd love to see it.
Yeah.
We're on the cusp of a dilemma in that school districts statewide are facing declining enrollments. We're
Right.
told about the birth rate is at a 40-year low. The funding that comes from the state, largely because the state is now responsible for funding education, the result of ballot measure 5, 20 some odd years ago, where it used to be funded locally. The state funds based on actual enrollments. That's why districts are asked to certify what their average daily membership is in October, and that is the basis on which the state gives the district funding. And that funding, if we want to effectively address class sizes, has to go up per student, even though we have declining enrollments. And that's a big ask of the legislature, given all the other demands that are placed on the state. And so that's what faces our legislative members. I would ask Noberto, the board is, as I understood, was going to engage in some kind of an audit or an assessment, because the district for over 50 years has been trying to address in various different ways the education gap that exists among the various races, one begins to wonder, for example, in my tenure on CBRC, I know Roosevelt High School, which at various times has had an enrollment around about 600 or so, has actually received not thousands, but millions of dollars and yet the gap seems to be rather persistent over the years from 2000 or 1960 when the model school program was first enacted and so on. And so one begins to wonder, you know, why Renee raised the question, you know, we're going to hire additional paras or extra resources, wraparound services for schools that need them. Where is the measure on the effectiveness? Maybe is that the right way to remedy the problem? Or obviously the district hasn't found the remedy over the last 50 years. So.
And it's definitely not unique to PPS, unfortunately, trying to find that right mix of investments and strategies and right. We have had community conversations and conversations even leading into this budget where a lot of emphasis, for example, was on class sizes, but also right, not thinking about like what are then the other levers to help improve student outcomes, whether it's increasing school leader capacity or redefining how professional development's experienced. There's like all these sort of different strategies that it's still the, I think, $1 million or I don't know, let's count inflation, the $1 billion question around like which mix is the best mix. And I don't think anyone has like the right answer, but like asking the question, I think, Roger, that you're getting to where we're moving away from how much to how well is I think the opportunity at hand. And as we think about this, the strategic plan, it was in one of the presentations and outlining the strategic initiatives in the strategic plan and thinking about how do those fit in closing or achieving the board goals. And it's going to start getting us closer to holding ourselves accountable, measuring. When now we have grade 3 reading for our Black students, we want to achieve 5.5 percentage point gain every year. What are then the strategies that are being implemented to make that happen? So I think, these are all great points that come to the table here.
And to follow up Renee's question about the hiring of additional wraparound services, does not the district deal with the fact that we're recruiting, but we're the number of hires is below what we're actually seeking. Say if we have 100 positions and we're only able to fill 70, what's the gap there?
Yeah, I don't have an exact number, but it's still a very tough labor market in finding individuals. So this current year, one of the incentives that we put in place was to offer a retention bonus, a retention stipend for paraprofessionals, because those it's very hard to find colleagues in those areas. And that plays itself out in different areas. So it's still something that as we compete for talent, trying to figure out what is that best approach. Olympia.
Yeah, I was just going to say, for the 2023 legislative session, as we enter it, I'm curious if, and I know we don't have all the answers about the state budget, but is state of Oregon's running, has about $2 billion less than it did last year after they're about to use, they started at $4 billion, they're about to use rainy day funds, they're going to be at $2 billion. So I'm curious if that's going to affect our, the mix of that and inflation is going to affect our budget. And then also, I think it's a great time kind of for the district to be thinking about starting the infrastructure of kicker reform because I don't think it'll pass this year with, there isn't a supermajority to pass tax reform in both chambers and so on. So I don't think, but starting that infrastructure, say in 2025, if it's a better year for education, then looking at if kicker reform is possible.
Yeah, I would cross my fingers. It would be an opportunity to reassess what that could look like. But to your first question regarding the state school, or excuse me, the budget and the state budget and the subsequent impact to the state school fund, I think as kind of like a flashback to May and June, that where we were working through our budget to get to where we are right now, we had to dig into our fund balance. So when we think about our fund balance, it's our savings account. So we had to use our fund balance to submit a balanced budget. So what that means is that our budgeted expenditures are more than like new revenue that's coming in. And so that scenario played out with a biennium budget of close to 9.3, I think it was about $9.3 billion. So as we enter this next legislative cycle, next biennium, it like 9.3, anything, 9.3 will not cut it, to put it simply. And as we have conversations with other local districts, there's the concept of the current service level that CSL. So for CBRC here, it's important to understand the current service level, which is the amount of funding required to keep minimum operations going. And it's a calculation based on all the districts in the state. So this isn't just about PPS, it's about the whole state. And to keep minimum service level requirements or the current service level requirements, the estimate is close to 10.3 billion for the biennium. So that's about another $1 billion on top of what we had this wrapping up this biennium cycle. So it's not a small amount. And so that's current service level agreement. And I think we'll make sure to share this. It's available on I believe it's the ODE website. There's a quality education model as well. So I think Roger's probably heard of it as well. And like the quality education model is essentially like a representation of, it models out the amount of funding needed to give our students and families like all the services that that would be required. So it's like not just current service level, it's above and beyond. It's providing quality education. And this is a study that gets done through the legislative process, and they then come up with a number that says, well, if we want to achieve quality education model, we should be funding the state school fund at X amount. And I believe the latest revision of that, it's about $11.9 billion. We're wrapping up a biennium at 9.3. So there's a very large gap to get to current service level, let alone quality education model. And folks will have different opinions, but that's right. It's normal. That's expected as to what the right amount should be. But then we're faced with the reality of how we start preparing for the next budget and the next conversations over the next few months. And so when we think about just to balance this year's budget, we needed to dig into our savings account. We need to be thinking, okay, that's not sustainable. So there's some unknowns. What's the next biennium budget going to look like? What's enrollment going to look like, right? And the way the funding formula works in Oregon is that it's one thing for our enrollment to go down or go up, but it's also dependent on what's happening with the other districts. And for the most part, a lot of districts are experiencing a decline. So it'll be interesting once we start submitting. A lot of districts, or most districts, are supposed to submit data to ODE, Oregon Department of Education, who then calculates estimates and calculates like this initial preliminary report on what funding would look like. So we're anxiously waiting, and usually that comes around in February. That will start, will better inform us of what is funding going to look like over the next year. They shall.
Yes, just a couple of clarifying questions, and I'm sure it's probably in the report, but when I was reading it, I might have overlooked it. But with the use of using all the student investment account, is there a plan for the following years and on what to do if we're running into this situation again? It looks like that there was, $1 million less being used this year. There was that federal one-time use of dollars being mentioned, which didn't have an amount that I didn't see. So if there can be some clarity around that. But what is the plan for this use of all of the student investment account this year for the upcoming years as well? Then what's the plan to replenish that, I guess, is what I'm really asking.
Yeah, so with the student investment account, that is funded through a corporate tax. And the student investment account, at least right now, based on the information we have, will be steady. So it'll be steady, which is, it's about $39 million. And it's also important to note, and this kind of leads into the second part of our agenda, which is the presentation, which the presentation is one of the asynchronous items. So I wasn't planning on going through each slide. Y'all have it, and we have a YouTube video recording of it as well. But I think one of the things to call out in the presentation, right, we have a pretty pie chart that shows, let me share it. Let me share my screen. I think it will be helpful for the conversation. Jordan, if you're able to make me co-host.
Yep, just give me 1 second here.
And Desha, I will answer your question. Don't worry.
It's fine.
Yeah.
All right, you should be able to share now.
Okay, let me make sure. Okay.
I have more, so.
I'm not the best at multitasking, so let me get this. Are you able to see the slides? Yes. Okay. My screen's a little wonky here. I have another monitor, so I may. Okay, that's actually that's interesting. So, SIA, student investment account. Student investment account rests in this red slice of the pie. The red slice of the pie is known as special revenue fund. It's a special revenue fund. You think about that area that holds restricted grants. The restricted grants have specific usage to them. And so the student investment account is a restricted grant. The state of Oregon lays out, okay, but you can use student investment account for the following activities. And we submit a plan. And the plan outlines, this is what we plan to do with the $38 million. This is how we plan to, we have it on our website. We can definitely share it. It lays out what we want to do. Now, the student investment account is a corporate tax. So there is some volatility to it if we enter into a recession where, or something like that happens that we can't collect corporate tax. And that actually happened, I believe the first year of implementation was around when the pandemic began. So all the districts were hopeful they were going to get $40 million and budgets were slashed by about 2/3. And so this was before me joining the district, but I've heard stories about that time period. And we've come through. The student investment account has been fully funded. And as we project into next year, the student investment account appears steady. And we're also in the midst of developing the next plan for the student investment account. The student investment account, ODE, or Oregon Department of Education, requires us to put together, I believe it was a 3-year plan, and we're wrapping up the 3rd year. Now, what's changing with the student investment account is that student investment account is part of a statewide effort known as an integrated grant guidance. So there's an integrated grant guidance that's being provided by the Oregon Department of Education that is requiring school districts to take SIA, High School Success, which is Measure 98, CTE, a few other funding sources, which all rest in that red slice of the pie, and for us to think about these different funding sources as a cohesive funding strategy to support outcomes. So in the presentation, so if y'all haven't had a chance to see it, there is a QR code that takes it to a survey for feedback on your thoughts on opportunities, how we should be leveraging the student investment account. The student investment account, along with, I'm just getting to the QR code for folks who may be online watching, they can access that. The student investment account, along with Measure 98, along with these few other funding sources, we're in the midst of putting the new plan together. So although we have the current SIA plan on our website that outlines the activities that we plan to do, that may change looking forward. So as we start planning for the next, I believe it's a 4-year plan. So what is the district's plan going to be over the 4 years? Over the next 4 years, that's what we're working on. The QR code here is to continue to provide feedback to us on from a community's perspective. What are some of the initiatives or activities that can continue to support the work? And then so that's SIA. And the reason why I wanted to bring up the pie is because SIA sits in this red slice. There is some impact based on enrollment, but the student investment account is still somewhat restricted. The blue slice of the pie is the general fund. The general fund is what allows for more flexibility. So and when I say flexibility, there's still restrictions. We can't just run off and do whatever we want with it. But it allows us to support day-to-day functions and activities. There could be some overlap between the blue slice and the red slice, but there's some very specific rules and compliance factors that we need to look into. But that is important to note as we think about how enrollment could impact the red slice versus the blue slice of the pie. Local option, we were just talking about the local option taxes. That's agnostic. That's not dependent on enrollment. That's a sliver of the blue pie. It's about 100 million out of that 800 million that is dependent on property taxes, but then it gets capped. So that was back to the earlier question on legislative efforts. So I'll stop there. And I think there was a question regarding, I believe it was maybe one of the federal funding sources as well, Michelle, but if you want to ask another question.
Yeah, and I guess I can look at that. I wonder if I could find that information on my own. I probably looked over the one-time federal funding amount that was mentioned in the report. But my question then is, when is the last time that all of the student investment account was used all at once?
So it's every year. So it gets distributed yearly.
Got it.
And we need to spend it down within, there's a little bit of leeway, but essentially like the easiest way to think about it is June 30th. So it's like June 30th, you need to spend it down. There's a little bit of carryover into latter parts of the summer, but June 30th, because that's when the fiscal year ends.
Okay, so
And-
there is some carryover. Got it. So it's dependent on the market, you said. So I guess with it being a very transitional year that we're coming up to, I think that's really what my question is gearing towards, is like, if we know we're getting ready to enter possibly a very transitional year in regards to lots of different things happening in 2024, right? With the student investment account being also tied up into the market. That's, I guess, I don't think it's going to be answered here tonight, but that's what I'm getting at is there a plan in place for that, with it being targeted to be used then? And seeing as it was impacted at one point before when things were a little bit more volatile. That's, I guess, where my mind is going toward. But that's, I don't want to go deep into that.
Yeah, right.
I want to throw on the table of us thinking about.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And that's part of the work that's ongoing with SIA planning, is aligning to our strategy, so that ultimately, which is what happened a few years ago, there were plans for the student investment account, but funding was cut. So then how could we leverage the blue slice of the pie, the general fund, to make up for some of those activities? But again, right, it's a pie, not a well. So there's always going to be like some give and take in figuring that out. I don't know who raised their hand first, but Karanja, you want to see your hand raised?
Yeah. Here, let me lower this. I'm just curious. I'm just looking at the overview of the budget and everything. I'm curious, is there a process where we actually evaluate the use of funds, how the funds were spent, and the evaluation? Is there like an evaluation process of like, number one, how the funds were spent and how effective whatever program was funded? And is there a process where we can reevaluate where we distribute funds and things of that nature? I'm just curious if there's a process for that.
Yeah, so it's not an easy answer. There are some processes to evaluate certain funding sources. For example, student investment account, we put a plan together, and then there's like conversations, there's assessments. Okay, did we do this? How well? And then, but then when we think about the 1.88 billion, that's $38 million. I know it's a lot of money in the grand scheme of things. The vast majority of our investment is at schools and at school sites. So when we start thinking about assessments, it's usually like relying on the human behavior or the human feedback loop. So if we're rolling out new curriculum. So how effective is the curriculum? Well, we need to have the professional development sessions. We need to see, not only get feedback from the teachers on how did they experience this, but then it needs to play out in the classrooms. And that process in itself usually it's 2 to 3 years before you start seeing actual results play out. And those assessments are with for like tests, whether it's the MAP test or some of the other tests, to start determining the effectiveness there. Now, I think where it gets tricky is all the different factors. And I'll share an example, not from PPS, but from a prior district, where it was a multi-million-dollar math program that was rolled out at 2 schools. Very similar demographics. One school had great success. The other school did not have great success. And as the assessment began into that, it was less about the program itself, but you had a school leader who was very happy and accepting of the program and worked hard with their staff to support and make it happen. Other school had there were more challenges in accepting the program and its rollout. And these are some of the nuances. Again, this was a previous place where that played out. And so to start measuring like, okay, well, there's so many different variables, it does get tricky. Doesn't mean we don't try. And then those conversations are part of conversations with the school leaders, with the instructional team to figure out what that looks like. And really, when I think about like, what does that mean from a community perspective? What does that mean for the everyday, parent? It's the type of I forget the name of the surveys that go out to families that ask for feedback and experiences around how they experience a day, and it's a matter of taking that information and processing it with some of these other conversations. And yeah,
I'm sorry to cut off your knowledge. I just got a quick question for clarification. Is there a way you can show the process of the timeline of when the budget is approved and our engagement? So it would help me if you can answer the question in terms of like, what in the time frame does this evaluation process begin? Is that ongoing? Is there a certain time frame where we should really give feedback so we can be able to make proper engagement in terms of discernment if this program is working, maybe some realignment and things like that? So if I can let me like see a visual of when that actual process happens, that will help me a lot.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Having on the screen is the budget cycle and milestones, and still, right, that's still kind of high level, but really it's going to come down to over the next few months, right? We'll be having conversations, we'll have guests who will share some information and have conversations, and then like really roll up your sleeves, starting to look at the taking all the learnings from these meetings and then rolling up the sleeves to look at where the budget is going to be in the April timeframe, between April and May.
Karanja, you're on mute, I think.
Sorry, I'm on mute. You had mentioned something that was prior, before that. Can you explain that process one more time? The cycle, the image that you're displaying.
So so kind of like taking a step back to think about where we are right now, we're transitioning from budget awareness. So like, what is the data telling us from enrollment to budget planning? What are the ongoing conversations that are happening, whether it's for the budget for next year? So the legislative cycle is about to start. In around the February timeframe, we'll start getting more information from the state around like, what do the numbers look like? And as we work through the budget planning process, in the budget building, so as we start getting into some more of like, these are the elements that are shaping up to be part of the budget, right? We'll be having these conversations, we'll be sharing information. And then between the April and May timeframe is when the budget book will be out. There'll be more conversations and being able to like pinpoint or ask more feedback or ask questions to eventually give feedback to the board, which is in a letter. And that happens in May as well. And the board formally adopts the budget in June. And we have a budget calendar that's more granular than this, actually has dates. So we can share that as well.
Keep in mind that budget calendar is also in the CBRC member portal. I'll link it in the chat as well.
Thank you. Other questions?
Roberta, I think you might have spoken to this just a moment ago around our expectations for financial information from the state. You said February is when we're likely to get projections.
Correct.
Do we have any trend lines that we're looking at yet?
We do, and the one is the biggest one is enrollment. Enrollment's not bouncing back to what we thought it was going to be. There's still some refining. There's still we work with the population center at PSU to help work through this, but the initial information is that it's not bouncing back.
Can you go any more granular on that? I'm pretty curious.
Like granular in the sense of like, is it?
Yeah, what are enrollment trends looking like, you know, versus pre-pandemic?
34, the superintendent said in his report that we were going to have 3,400 less students.
And that's out of 60-some thousand, is that right?
No, it's so pre-pandemic we were at about 48,000 and maybe a little closer to 49,000, and we're trending closer to 42,000.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think Roger mentioned regarding births, and so once you start extrapolating out, that continues to go down.
Kind of two questions. One is, do we know where those students went? And where are kind of the biggest, I think it was middle school saw the biggest effects, if I remember correctly. So is that kind of staying consistent through past year into next year? And what are our projections for how enrollment will change next year?
Yeah, so I don't have specifics to like what grade bands may be experiencing that, but we can I can go see if that's readily available. For next year, it is still it's landing at about 42,000 students as a whole. Now, where have the students gone? Yeah, it's one of those that it's not just a PPS question or impact. It's across the nation. Just I think it was yesterday, the day before, Wall Street podcast. I think it was Wall Street Journal. Like there's 1 million students across the country that are just missing. So whether an initial inclination is, yeah, maybe some shifted to private schools or home schools, but it is a phenomenon that is just impacting a lot of districts, and Oregon districts, PPS are no different, are feeling the effects there.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to think 1 million students, you know, went to private school or online.
Right.
But, yeah.
Yeah. And then it's like, is there even enough capacity at other school, right? When you think about the scale of it. But the trend data is now pointing towards 4,000 students coming back. Roger.
To try to answer the questions, I would encourage committee members, if you can at all, follow board meetings, because decisions get made in the board meetings that do affect the instructions to the superintendent to construct the budget. Regarding enrollment, my understanding of Dr. Adams' presentation was our largest declines are in the elementary grades, then in the middle school, and in this last year, the high schools experienced the lowest number of decline. It goes back to the birth rate. Birth rate is at a 40-year low nationwide, not just in Portland district. When I graduated high school in Portland public schools, the school district was 70,000 students. If we're going down to 42,000, that explains there's quite a little bit of gap. There were 12 high schools in my day. There's nine comprehensive high schools now. So lots of the questions that are raised today are partially answered in board meetings and also what the legislature does. The legislature historically waits until they get economic forecast in early May, and then they come and enact in a budget. And some years they go beyond their cutoff date, and it requires districts to adopt a budget because we're required to adopt one, and then we have to come back and amend it based on what the legislature has done. So.
Thank you,
And
Roger.
there's a disparity between the state's fiscal year and the federal fiscal year, so that helps to exacerbate some problems too.
It exacerbates folks on my team. Keeping track of that. Other questions? And so as we continue these conversations, it's really, I think, leveraging this session and the next session as like building understanding, so that as we work towards the superintendent's proposed budget, which is April 25th, I believe, 23rd or 25th, there's some concepts and elements that are already familiar. But as we work through this, there's the synchronous materials. We'll be coming back. There'll be more presentations, more information. And then I think just reiterating the opportunity to, on your own time, you have questions. There's the forum. We can come back and answer them. We knew there's a few questions from today's meeting as well. We're going to take back and get some answers. And so if there aren't any other questions, I wanted to just circle back to the first topic of something that y'all will have to work on for, it has nothing to do with one of my slides or presentations, is identifying a chair and a co-chair and a vice chair. So I just wanted to bring that topic up again and open it up for discussions. No expectations for nominations, but just thinking about if y'all have questions for each other, kind of creating the space for y'all to have a conversation around this.
I'll just add. Oh, sorry, Renee. I was just going to add to this and just say, thinking about what you all would like to see. I was really excited by the number of questions you had tonight, but I'm just thinking for future meetings, co-chairs, chairs, very helpful in making sure we get on the agenda what many of you would like to be focusing on each meeting. So the sooner we can get that in, the better. Yeah. And of course, if there are things that you want on the agenda and we don't have chair and co-chair, I'll also say that you can reach out to me and we can collaborate on that.
And I think as important, helping to facilitate the conversation on writing the report for the board, and that, right, that's a final deliverable along with the local option levy and getting that assessed and helping to facilitate those conversations. Roger.
I was going to say, last year, I reluctantly accepted to be chair. I routinely just consulted with Jordan, and we jointly came up with an agenda, and that's how we operated. And I tried to chair the meeting in such a way where everybody was able to participate, and but I kept an eye on the clock, and there's no necessity for every individual to speak 5 times on the same topic and so on. So, last year, the vice chair was Lisa Selman, and if she's willing, I would offer her nomination as chair.
So I guess I I see Renee smiling as I have a lot of work and personal commitments that really make me hesitate. And so I'm absolutely here to help and can help facilitate. I'm not sure if I'm the right person to lead. But again, I'm willing to help in what way I can. So I'll leave it at that and see if there's other people that step forward.
I thought we were going to discuss this next week.
I'm letting y'all figure it out.
Oh,
I did say, right, discussion, no pressure to nominate today, but kind of working towards having someone elected for next meeting. It would be amazing if that did happen tonight. But again, I want to create the space here. Since we haven't met, it's been a month or so. Roger.
Well, historically speaking, members, CBRC is ideally gets underway in September. There's lots of reasons why that didn't happen this year, and I won't go into that now. But some of the expressions about becoming more familiar with this or that subject area. The September till the time that we receive the proposed budget is the time where we can learn in depth about various aspects of historically, for example, briefings on ELL or English language learning, special education, the tier system for that is used in disciplinary hearings and so on. But so I would really hope that we would make a selection tonight, and let's get on with the work that we have confronting us. So my own preference is I think that it's helpful for a chair to have had some previous experience. But if a freshman wants to step up and be the chair, then so be it.
Good question here. I'm curious, this is maybe for Roger and for the professional staff as well. What's the role of the professional staff in terms of supporting the writing of that kind of end recommendation to the board?
We are not involved in writing it, so it is at the discretion of the committee.
Yeah,
we can
the
help
only
answer
thing we support,
questions.
yeah, and the formatting and the and housing the document, but yeah, we don't write anything.
Okay, I was just curious if you could assist with, say, references, or if there are questions around that, along with the rest of the committee.
That's been handled variously over the years, but largely chair and the vice chair have ended up being the scriveners of the report. But last year we had a very collegial way of working where individuals took responsibilities for drafting certain paragraphs, and then we collectively discussed them and came up with a consensus report. And there were 3 people, I believe, that presented the report to the board. starting out last go around, we had the board chair ask us not to read the report, because supposedly board members had already read it. If any of you have been following board meetings, you know that there's at least one board person that prides themselves in not reading any of the board packets. So I really question whether or not the board reads the report in advance. But anyway, it was a collective effort to draft the report, and our staff becomes an enabler in formatting and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I would say for the 2 years I've served, the first year it was more the chair and co-chair, and last year, like Roger said, it was a collective. We broke it up into sections and people took responsibility for those. And I actually feel like the report at the end of the day was a better product, because I think it allowed us to come back together and have a lot of conversations, and people didn't necessarily have to agree on everything, but that what we said, I think everybody felt good about, and what the issues we highlighted. Again, I think everybody came out of it feeling like everybody's voice was heard, and some stronger statements were made than I think the previous year. And so again, like I think all of us collectively worked on it, and, it narrowed down to a few of us who just kind of all got it, into one final document to submit. But I do think as a collective effort, to me, it felt like a better report at the end of the day.
And I second that. Yeah.
Well, I'd be interested in, perhaps serving in a co-chair or a vice chair role. Being a new member to this committee, I would want to be paired with someone who's had some experience on the committee, but I would be willing to serve in that capacity if desired.
Roger, would you be interested in being chair again this year? And is it possible for the same person to be chair 2 years in a row? I just want to ask openly, know the answer to that.
Well, in the interest of moving things along, I'd be happy to chair, but I will only do so as a facilitator to keep the meeting moving and starting on time and ending in a reasonable time and so on. And but Lisa was an excellent vice chair last time, and if Maria is willing to serve as co-chair, I'm happy to work with her too. So.
Well, I think there would be space for all three of you. So then it would I think it just come down to formal nominations, of course, if Lisa and Mariah accept, but if it would be chair, co-chair, and then vice chair. So just kind of yeah, go for it.
So can I be more advisor and I'll help with the report? How about that? I'll take the lead on the report. How's that?
I defer to the group.
Okay.
I think the shared power dynamic is reflective of the equity work that we're saying we want to do, and it looks like this is going to work for the group, and so I'm all for it.
I'm for it.
And it could be two. That's fine. that would work.
I have a
Renee?
question. I do.
Please.
So.
Oh.
Hello? Oh, yeah. As far as vice chair, so you all three people have already been selected, or is the vice chair still open? Because I was just listening to everybody and how they felt about it. In regards to help facilitate meetings and things of that nature.
It's still open. So I think just informally, what I heard is for Roger to continue as chair, for Mariah to be co-chair, and then a pending or TBD to be determined. There's still opportunity for vice chair. And it would
I'm sorry. If nobody else would, I would do it. I mean, I've never been as far as vice chair, but I have served in many other capacities. With boards and everything. So yeah.
Renee, were you going to?
I was gonna ask, what's the difference between a vice chair and a co-chair? Just
Yeah.
a question.
So when I think about,
so people, I'm not sure what each person does. I know what Roger said he would do, but then I don't know what the other two people do.
I don't know if we have it spelled out in the bylaws. We don't, and so they're just going off how I've experienced it.
Okay.
Obviously, it would be up to the committee to design, and usually it could very well be that simply the three of you help facilitate the meetings or help design, lean into the agenda setting and those conversations. But if we were to look at it simply from a hierarchical perspective, chair, co-chair, and vice chair. But I was just about to call on Roger. Roger, you've raised your hand. You've been several CBRC committees and could share a lot more insight than I can.
Well, I think typically the chair works with the staff in making an agenda, and then presides over the meeting, and that's the work. And last year, our co-chair Lisa Selman took the lead in helping us draft our report. So if she's willing to play an advisory role, as she calls it, that's the task at hand. We've had historically, I mean, one year we had co-chairs, and we had co-vice chairs, and we had co-student chairs, and there was a whole legion. It was half the committee that had some kind of a title, but in actual fact, in day-to-day labor, it didn't translate into any additional responsibility. So I think if I'm going to chair and we have I'm trying to remember all the names of the person who stepped up to be co-chair or vice chair.
Mariah.
Yeah, and then Taz, if she wishes to participate, then why don't you just elect the three of us and let's move on.
I did want to ask also, I believe at one of our earlier meetings, we had a question around the collection of questions and answers. It looks like staff, like Jordan's been doing that on the website there. Was that the intent, that you were going to continue with that, or was there some responsibility of the committee back to kind of those questions and addressing that?
Jordan does that, I think.
Yeah, so it's kind of, it's totally up to the committee how they would like to submit questions. And in the past, there's been a scenario where questions are submitted just to a chair or vice chair, and then they were given to the staff just so that there's one person. But I went ahead and created this part of the portal so that folks could just submit questions and they would all be in a spreadsheet. So honestly, it's totally up to the committee how they want to do it. But those are currently the two options out there. Of course, the third option is that anybody can ask questions to any staff, but that's not necessarily ideal. Getting responses quickly and efficiently.
In the absence of somebody presiding right now, Jordan has answered the question. I think last year it worked fairly well. The questions were submitted to Jordan, and he took care of it. But in previous years, we did have a problem where individuals from the committee were going to individual staff members at Blanchard and now Crawford, that resulted in some confusion as to among the staff as to whom are they answering and preparing their work. That their time is limited too. So so that's why we directed questions through the chair, and there was no effort to censor, but it was to if you had similar questions to aggregate them and then present them to the staff to get a response and so on. So I think in answer to Mariah's question, we can continue as we did last year.
Roger, did you say Blanchard?
I said it's now called Profit. If
Oh,
you
okay.
didn't hear.
Just checking.
Yeah, and I was around when Matthew was the superintendent. So
Okay, just checking.
I think the best way is to submit the questions and then have a spreadsheet where we have the answers, just so we all kind of have access to the same answers. My guess is we'll have a lot of similar questions. So yeah.
that's the purpose that Jordan did, was he put the question out and showed what the response was, and it was shared with all of us. So
Yeah, I think the website that he's created is working really nicely. I just wanted to make sure there wasn't some responsibility for the chair or co-chair around that, because it seems like there's a good system right now.
Now, I do have a question, Jordan. So instead of us asking, so I had those questions before I came on. So would you prefer me to type that in before the meeting?
I think
as soon as I have the questions?
I think it's a two-part. Like, if of course we're open to answering questions during the meeting, that's totally fine. We're pretty good at. Alexandra Martin's here with us today, by the way. She wasn't in the last meeting. She's on our team as well. We do a pretty good job of tracking your questions in meeting, so don't necessarily refrain from asking questions during the meetings. If you have questions ahead of time that you know you're going to ask, definitely if you submitted them in the form ahead of time, we could get more full answers. So there are some things tonight like we couldn't answer. If those are submitted ahead of time, we would have had maybe a little time to get answers for you. But yeah, it's both for sure.
So do I hear nominations on the floor?
I move that we have, I think I have this right, Roger is the chair, Mariah is the co-chair, and Taz is the vice chair. Is that correct?
I believe so, yes.
And I will second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I
Oh,
Looks like everyone.
And any against?
Can
Okay.
you repeat who seconded that motion?
Lisa.
Lisa. Okay, thank you.
Great. The motion passes. Congratulations. Looking forward to working with you all. Of course, continuing working with everyone here. So that'll be exciting. So quiet, so awkward virtually, right? It's just
Yeah.
like I'm just imagining the roaring applause.
yes, I'm doing
Yeah,
in the
woo.
background. You
Right.
can't see it though, but I'm doing it.
There you go. Exactly.
okay, the question now becomes, Berto, is there anything else on the agenda that we need to address tonight? If not, we will move toward adjournment.
I'm there with you. There is no other item.
I'll just quickly say for now that we have a chair and co-chairs, and in terms of the next agenda, I'll be reaching out to you all specifically and just asking you how you'd like to start facilitating that that work. But yeah.
Yeah, Jordan, why don't you remind us when we're meeting again?
You always say that, Roger, and I never have the calendar in front of me.
I believe it's February 2nd, 5:30.
Is that right? February 2nd, 5:30? Yep. On the dot. I'll send reminders.
Okay, well, thank you, and we will meet again on the 2nd of February. Hopefully, look forward to receiving an agenda in advance and the link and all that information that Jordan graciously provides us each time. So thank you very much for your participation tonight, and it was a good discussion, and we'll see you in February. Good night.
Mr. Roger, could I have your email address? I might have some questions. Is that okay?
I'm happy to respond to any questions, and my email is on the group thing, but it's RKK, it's all lowercase, RKKPDX, like the airport, @gmail.com.
Okay, and yep, thank you. And Mariah, can I have yours as well? Is that okay with you?
Absolutely. It's my name, Mariah Dula @gmail.
Okay.
Look forward to working with you both.
Yep.
Have a great evening, everyone.
Hopefully you won't have any emails from community members. Just thinking it's on